I'm not sure if we are live, but let me check my Facebook. A little bit. Hello, guys. Hello. Welcome to another episode of the Tom Tombeka Unplugged podcast. Let me check my Facebook and YouTube to verify if we are on live. Let me check Facebook for feedback and YouTube as well. If I am live, we are not live. I'm not sure what's going on, but we are not live. Okay, go live. Today we are going to be discussing the trade wars. Trade wars, um, mostly triggered by President Donald J. Trump of the United States. He has several confrontations with China during his first term, and now is just after his ascendancy to the American presidency, he has triggered another confrontation with Canada and the Mexico. So trade wars are basically tariff war. It could be seen as a way of taxing other countries that you trade with in terms of products and services that is imported and exported between two or more countries. So, take for example, the United States trade often with China. China have lesser labor or cost less costly labor force. They have the land mass, they have the technical know-how, they have all the industries there. And so their capacity to mass produce goods and services is their strength as a country. So the United States and America have relationship in terms of trade relationship with China. However, given the global confrontation in terms of global power, power play through politics, through the military, through trade as well, there have been several confrontations between the United States and China. So China has the strength, economic strength in terms of production capacity. They have the land mass, they have the less costly labor force, like I said, and they have the know-how, the technical skills that is required to mass produce. So obviously, US would be interested in such a country. China and US and China have been trading for quite a long time. They have a long history of trading, and most of the products in the United States, what are brands, what are all the brands that you have, Balenciaga, Adidas, most of the products are mass produced in China. The American regulation in terms of products quality, in terms of the services they provide, the companies in China will meet up with those regulations as laid out about for America or what other country the China is mass producing for. However, although China has the capacity to mass produce, and most of the companies in America have agreements with China for their products to be produced in China, however, the American government still have the final say. And so, basically, the trade war has to do with President Donald Trump imposing higher tariffs on services, on products, on goods and services emanating from China. So trade between China and the United States is kind of tax, wherein if a product coming from China, let's say a shoes or hoodie, take for example this hoodie coming from China, initially, let's say between the under the Biden administration cost $5 for this hoodie. To get the imported from China to America, you have to pay $5 US. Donald Trump is saying that he wants to increase tariff on this hoodie from $5 US to maybe 650 or six United States dollars. So let's say, for example, $6 US. So you want to increase it by $1. So this is his argument that America, due to the value that America has, due to all the trade agreements, all the companies trading with China, with other companies in China, China having agreements with American companies for their products to be produced in China and exported to the rest of the world. America and President Donald Trump is saying all these contracts, all these agreements we have with you, they are very substantial, and we think we can accrue more taxes on them for the benefit of the American people. And so we are going to increase our taxes. During his first term, he had several trade war with China and other countries. His second term, he started with Canada and Mexico by increasing the tariff on goods being imported from Canada to the United States, exported from Mexico to the United States. So he increased the tariff on those goods and services that are being provided. So Donald Trump insists that American economy is a great economy, and he claims that the American economy is the best economy. It provides the productivity of the American economy benefits the world at large, and so all those having trading agreement with the United States or partnership or businesses trading among businesses, the argument is that the American people are not really benefiting as they are supposed to. So by increasing the tariff on products and services that have been influenced by the American finances through their companies, maybe through the government or through private sector companies, he wants to raise the taxes so that more money could be raised by the government to provide the much needed services to the American population. This is his argument on trade war. So we are going to go through a video. I'm not going to do all the explaining, but we are going to go through a video where we will see the interaction and further discussion on the trade war. Okay, so we are live. We are live. We are live on Facebook. Next thing now, I need to check my YouTube account to see if we are live on YouTube as well. But before that, let me share with several groups. So this episode will be about the trade war, discussing trade wars, what trade wars entails, what the fundamentals about trade wars are. When we talk about President Donald Trump imposing tariffs on goods and services, and raising the taxes. Tariffs are the best way to put it are considered as taxes, taxing the products and services emanating from other countries that come to the United States. So, take for example, the United States and China have several trading agreements. There are many companies located in China that trade with United States companies. So, take for example, Adidas, Balenciaga, all these great and big companies, global companies in the world that have their headquarters in the United States, but they have production plants or production agreements in China, and so the goods are mass produced in China, exported to the United States and the rest of the world. Donald Trump thinks that the American government and people should benefit from that by raising the tariffs on these goods and services to ensure that they can raise higher taxes, they can accumulate more taxes to service the American population in terms of public service, pay them, give them higher pay, higher access to public service as well. So this is Donald Trump argument. That has been his argument from the very onset of his first tenure when when he served the American people as president during his first tenure, and he has several trade wars with China. I can vividly recall I was uh, back then an intern at the World Trade Organization in Geneva when most of the debates were held on the floor of special committees at the World Trade Organization, China, America imposing their demands on what they think um, which country tariffs should be imposed on, and how they were going to proceed with tariffs and increasing tariffs on other countries, and China taking the floor. It used to be so interesting. I can vividly recall America would take the floor, expand for about 30 to 40 minutes, then the floor will be open. Other countries will make comment, but when China take the floor, they will respond about for 1 hour, responding to America claims. And that experience was so interesting as a little man from Liberia or third world country or least developed member of the World Trade Organization. That experience was something that resonates with me up to now. The trade wars between China and the United States of America, debating the issues at the World Trade Organization, having various arguments on why America should not impose tariff or increase tariffs on goods and services globally with specific countries, and China reporting the American trade representative at the World Trade Organization on the floor. It was a very interesting experience. So I just want to go back. Donald Trump's second term, he was elected last year, 2024. He had been inducted into office. His first day in office, he had several executive order that he instituted in the country. 1 week, 1 to 2 weeks into his presidency, Donald Trump has targeted Canada and Mexico by raising the tariffs on goods and services coming from America, from Mexico and Canada to America, as well as products and services emanating from the United States to Canada and Mexico. So the trade war have begun, but this time around is with Canada and Mexico. Initially, during his first tenure, it was with China and America, the trade war. But I think for now, he is going to actually extend his trade wars to China because that's the global opponent of America, and some countries in the EU, the European Union region as well. So Donald Trump trade wars continues, and we are just going to look into what is the what when we hear trade war, what it basically entails is that goods and services that are imported and exported between countries, that the tariffs are raised or decreased. So, in terms of trade wars, the tariffs are increased. So, if a hoodie, like I said, for an example, I initially used to buy this hoodie for $5 from China to the United States, is exported from China to the United States, and I can receive it with a payment of $5 and buy it online. Donald Trump is saying that $5 should be raised to $6 or $6.50 in certain instances, given the type of goods. So he wants to increase the tariff on specific goods and services because Donald Trump's argument is that China is stealing the Americans' intellectual property, and China have lack of piracy. China is hiding under the canopy of least developed country, of developing country status at the World Trade Organization, and so they are now considered a developed country. And so they are benefiting from a developing country status as well, which is a political approach to look at China. But their main argument is China steals a lot of the American intellectual property. And so a way to combat against China influence is to raise the tariff, because most of the companies globally, big companies, giant companies in the world, you must have some level of trading with the United States. And even if you don't have trading with the United States directly, the United States influence over the European Union, South America, and all the global influence is so pivotal that you cannot divorce yourself from trading with the United States, because the United States influence is global. So in order to be a successful company, you must have certain level of export or goods, exporting your goods and services within the United States, or using United States capital, their money, to maybe through loan directly or indirectly to produce your goods at a mass scale. So America argument is that since companies globally are benefiting from their economy, maybe through finances or from their market, through the purchasing power of the American population, 350 million plus Americans. so he can raise the tariffs on these goods and services that is being imported and exported between countries that trade with the United States. So he is raising the tariff, and which is seen directly by increasing the taxes on goods and services. So to have a broader and much deeper understanding of this, we are going to go through a video together as well to understand trade wars. What are trade wars? From a technical perspective, I have a deeper understanding of trade wars, having a background in international trade, intellectual property, as having served as an intern at the World Trade Organization for roughly a year, was opportune to have heard the debates and the demands coming from the United States representative at the World Trade Organization during committee meetings, and hearing the response of developing countries and least developed countries, and hearing the opponent of the United States that was back then seen as the target of the trade war, China responding to the American imposition of tariffs on goods and services, and using the World Trade Organization dispute settlement mechanism to combat the United States attack on trade wars, to have a means to retaliate on the United States of America. But of recent, the trade war is with Canada and Mexico. So let's look at this video. Let's go through this video together to understand what the trade war is all about. President Donald J. Trump trade war with Canada and Mexico. So this video will briefly highlight what the trade war is, what tariffs are increased on goods and services, and how the Canadian and Mexican government are approaching President Donald Trump trade war for 2025. So let's view this video together to have a broader understanding of what the trade war is. So let me share my screen here. Okay, this is a trade war here. So let me share my screen so we can go through this video together. Let me see if we are live. So, okay. So we are live here. So share my screen. You can view other video.
Hello, I'm Lucy Hawkins. From the BBC World Service, this is The Global Story. This week, economic warfare broke out between the world's two biggest superpowers. President Trump announced a new tariff, essentially a tax, on Chinese goods coming into the US. And now, Beijing has hit back. So can anyone really win a trade war? And what would the impact be on the rest of the world? With me today is Rishika Gupta, who is our North America business correspondent, joining us from New York, and the BBC World Service Asia Pacific editor, Michael Bristow. Well, if there's one thing we know about Donald Trump, it's that he loves tariffs.
The word tariff, properly used, is a beautiful word. One of the most beautiful words I've ever heard. It's music to my ears.
I always say tariffs is the most beautiful word to me in the dictionary.
They are at the heart of his economic plan for the United States. During his first term and also throughout the presidential campaign, he was very clear. He thinks tariffs are going to help make America and American people richer. And he also thinks that they're a useful tool in helping to get other countries to do exactly what he wants. Before we go any further, though, I think, Ritika, we need to cover some basics. Like, what exactly is a tariff?
You see, a tariff is a tax on imported goods from foreign countries. So Trump had proposed a 25% tax on Canada and Mexico, which have now been paused. But as an example, say you had a product that was worth $4, that would result in a $1 additional charge. So the total product costing some $5 or so.
President Trump repeatedly says that a tariff is a tax on a foreign country. He said that time and time again. Is that true?
No, it's not necessarily the country that pays for the tariff. It's the importing business that typically pays that extra charge. However, many economists have warned that these costs will be passed on to the American consumer because your businesses, your Walmarts, your Targets, for instance, may be facing margin pressure. So ultimately, it'll be the consumer that pays. And that shows up again on their receipts when they go into their big box chain stores.
So although there's been a lot of talk about the negative impacts of tariffs, for the Trump administration, there has been one big success already this week. When Donald Trump threatened to impose tariffs on Canada and Mexico, he said it was largely because of concerns about border security. Now, both Mexico and Canada have made big commitments to increase security at their borders. So, Ritika, can this be seen as a big win then for the use of tariffs?
In some ways, Lucy, it's worked. He showed in some ways the kind of the art of negotiating a deal because, as you say, Canada and Mexico did cede to Trump's demands when it came to adding extra border security. But there's also the U.S. trading off too in some ways, and many experts have said that you didn't need necessarily the threat of tariffs to get some of those things done, and it also does cause concern and uncertainty about tit for tat and the escalation of a global trade war as well, and that's what many experts and economists have been warning are the dangers of this.
The biggest target of Trump's tariffs so far, though, has been China. And economists are worried that we could be on the brink now of a real trade war between China and the US. This isn't a new war, though, because President Trump began this economic war with China during his first term when he was in office. Mickey, why does Donald Trump see China as such an economic threat?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's not necessarily obvious why China should be an economic threat. I think first and foremost, it's just a very, very big economy, which does a lot of trade with the United States. We're talking about $500 billion. Also, the United States is in deficit in that trade with China. So essentially, the United States imports far more goods, hundreds of billions more goods than it exports to China. So I think President Trump, what he does is he sees that, he saw that big deficit, and he wants to do something about it because it appears as though China's winning and the United States is losing. Also, in his first term in office, there were some very specific things which President Trump complained about China for, which previous American officials had complained before, specifically stealing intellectual property, forcing American companies to transfer technology to Chinese firms. If they wanted to set up operations in China, they could only do it, say, with a joint venture. They had to transfer their technology. Also, he accused China of currency manipulation, essentially keeping the currency at a particular level to make those exports cheaper.
Mickey, China has always said it doesn't want a trade war with the US. And then we also, back in 2017, I remember Donald Trump speaking at the World Economic Forum. He said, we don't want to start a trade war with China. But we did then see China responding with tariffs of its own in a kind of tit-for-tat way. What were they?
China doesn't want a particular trade, it doesn't want a trade war at all. The economy is based primarily on exports. So if there's some barrier to those exports going to other countries, then it doesn't want them. I had a look back at the list of reactions that China made when President Trump was in his first term in office, and there's a whole series of them, raising tariffs by 10%, then 10% again, 25% in some cases. They also reported the United States to the World Trade Organization. They stopped buying some products, agricultural products particularly, outright, which really affected farming in America. So a range of tools which China used, which incidentally is the kind of tools which it's already using now with these latest tariffs imposed by President Trump, similar kind of tools, not just tariffs, but also non-tariff measures to try and harm the American economy.
Now, although this trade war has been simmering for several years, it really is hotting up now that Donald Trump has returned to the White House. Ritika, can I ask you a bit more about these latest tariffs Donald Trump has introduced? What are the new tariffs on Chinese goods that he's introduced this week?
So some of the biggest tariffs are going to be on electronics, toys and appliances, consumer electronics being one of the top goods imported from China to the US. If you look at data, that includes cell phones, TVs, your laptops, game consoles. China is also a major supplier of home appliances as well. And also footwear. You see a lot of footwear products also being imported into the US from China.
And what new tariffs, Ritika, have China announced in return?
The tariffs from China are actually rather minimal. They're seen as not such an aggressive approach, 10 to 15% levies on selected goods. So part of China's countermeasures include an import taxes on US coal and LNG. That's 10% and a 15% charge on crude oil. And as well as fuel, China has also slapped a 10% tariff on agricultural machinery, pickup trucks and some large cars. And they've also announced some non-tariff measures as well, one of which is a probe into Google and an anti-monopoly investigation into that tech giant.
And Mickey, is there any indications yet as how these US tariffs are going to affect the Chinese economy?
Just at the moment, when the Chinese authorities need their economy, need people to be spending more money, it's gonna hit those manufacturers that sell to the United States. So it's definitely an unwelcome thing when it comes to China.
But because they've been through this before, because Trump did this to them in his last term, are they better prepared in a way? Have they got a strategy of how to deal with it? Sort of decoupling from the US, a bit diversifying their markets as well?
I don't think decoupling is remotely possible. We're talking about trade, hundreds of billions of two-way trade between these two countries every year. There has been some attempt by America, particularly President Biden, to try and not sell certain technology products, high-end technology products to China. But the two economies are so integrated that decoupling is really impossible. In fact, under the Biden administration, later on, officials stopped talking about decoupling and started using other words to suggest they're just targeting specific areas of the Chinese economy. Is China more prepared? I think he was expecting this. So before President Trump came into office, Xi Jinping, the Chinese leader, the Chinese ambassador in Washington, all went on the charm offensive, tried to persuade President Trump before he was coming into office, just don't do this. Nobody will win with a trade war. We can both win if we keep tariffs out of the equation. So they knew something was coming. And also, to a certain extent, as you suggested there, they could prepare. There are many ways in which China can hurt the American economy which don't involve tariffs.
Well, we know that Donald Trump sees tariffs as a way of rebalancing global trade and a way that he hopes that America can stay on top and remain the world's economic superpower. So is he going to be successful in stopping China's economic rise? Mickey, China is selling goods, as you've mentioned, everywhere, not just to the US. It has been the main driver of growth in the past few decades. Surely there must be really deep concern now in China about these tariffs and that more could be coming. This could just be the start.
I mean, of course there is. I mean, the Chinese economy really isn't doing awfully well. It needs impetus. It needs a boost from somewhere. But to a certain extent, there's not a lot the Chinese can do about President Trump if he decides to use tariffs. And you've already touched on it, that tariffs are sometimes used again, used in ways which are for non-economic reasons. We talked about Mexico and Canada sending reinforcements to their borders to stop illegal immigrants and illegal drugs from getting over that border. So really he's using economics to solve political problems. Perhaps, and President Trump has mentioned this previously, China can help with the war in Ukraine because it has influence with Russia. China's trade with Russia has really just gone through the roof. since Russia invaded Ukraine, hundreds of billions of dollars worth of trade between those two countries. So perhaps President Trump could persuade China to use its influence with Russia over the war in Ukraine in return for dropping tariffs. So that's politics being changed through economic means again.
Everyone talks about President Trump being very transactional and he likes a deal. What's Xi Jinping like? Like if the two of them are on a call?
Well, in some respects, quite similar. I mean, I think China doesn't always say out loud what its policy is, what its foreign policy aims, what it's trying to do. In fact, very rarely does it say. But I think if there is an overarching philosophy when it comes to China and Xi Jinping and the Communist Party generally, it's trade with the rest of the world. Trade has made us rich. Trade will make you rich as well if you trade with us. So in that respect, it is transactional. You know, we benefit, you benefit. Win-win is a constant refrain from Chinese officials. Trade is, as the Chinese see it, and most economists, most traditional economists would agree with the Chinese, it benefits both sides. I trade with you, you win, I win.
Ritika, one of the things that economists say about tariffs all the time is that it creates price rises that ultimately end up being bad for consumers. Do you think that these new tariffs and the potential of a tariffs war with China could really impact consumers in America?
That is something that economists warn of, is that ultimately the consumer pays the price for these higher tariffs, even if the companies initially pay for the tariff. There's a lot of pressure on margins for companies as their costs rise, and then ultimately the consumer ends up paying. So there is a likelihood that is what economists have been warning, and it is also seen as counterproductive in some ways to one of the key objectives that President Donald Trump had, which was to keep the cost of living for Americans low. And then there's also the issues of the monetary policy side and what it means for the Federal Reserve. If inflation rises, then it means that their interest rate policy would be impacted, whether they have to lift rates, and how that could impact the economy and economic growth.
Dieser ergonomische Bürostuhl von Ofinto erspart dir den verspannten Nacken nach dem Arbeiten und kostet nur 299 Franken. Beim Ergo.
Ultimately, Mickey, we've got President Trump and Xi Jinping on the phone together. Do you think that Xi Jinping will bend at all, will give in to Donald Trump?
They will give something. Definitely China will give something because of all the reasons I've explained before. The export economy is vital for the Chinese economy as a whole. They will not want that disrupted, particularly to one of their biggest markets. And if you look back at what China did previously in the first Trump presidency, they did make concessions. Some kind of deal was enacted in the end. Now, you could argue whether China didn't renege on the terms of that deal. It might well have done. And that's certainly what President Trump would argue. But China is just as determined when it comes to politics. And it too, I think, would be prepared not to go to the whole hog to appease President Trump. They have got their red lines. And I think they've got some really good measures, or some measures which could potentially hurt America in a way that President Trump wouldn't want. And they're in it for the long haul. They don't have a limited time frame. They've got a longer time frame. So I think they will give some ground, but not as much as President Trump would want.
And I know it's been a holiday in China, so we haven't seen the full response to this, but has there been any sort of increase in nationalism? We saw it immediately in Canada with Justin Trudeau coming out and big signs coming out saying "Buy Canadian" and Canadians booing the Star-Spangled Banner at sports matches. Any kind of nationalistic fervour in China as a result of this?
In this case, they won't want to, the Chinese Communist Party, try and drum up nationalistic fervour at this early stage, because they'll hope it's all resolved without too many problems, without getting everybody angry in a way which makes it then difficult for the government to back down and do some deal with Donald Trump. But I think in the future, if this continues, that nationalist fervour will certainly play a part and stiffen the resolve of the Communist Party.
Ritika, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mickey.
Thank you.
If you want more episodes of The Global Story, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. Each day, we dive deep into one big international transactional story in detail. And don't forget to subscribe and leave some comments below. We love to hear from you. Wherever you've been watching or listening, thanks so much for joining us.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Steve Clemens, and I have a question. With the U.S. distracted in the Middle East, and despite Trump's bluster about a new trade war with China, does China really have anything to worry about? Let's get to the bottom line. The United States has the biggest economy in the world, but China is second and catching up real fast. And this has made America, well, really increasingly testy. American politicians, both Democrat and Republican, have been talking for decades about the need to counter the threat of China and its growing influence, not only in Africa and Latin America, but all over the world. It's not just about banning TikTok. China produces 8 times more steel than America and double the number of cars and trucks, dominates the solar industry, and controls 80% of the minerals needed for electric vehicles. So despite the trade tensions, the Great Wall of Tariffs, launched by President-elect Donald Trump in his first term and continued by President Joe Biden, how worried is China about relations with the next Trump White House? Welcome to this special edition of the show, coming to you from the Doha Forum in Qatar, where we're talking with Victor Gao, the Vice President of the Center for China and Globalization in Beijing. I'm so glad you were able to join us today. Thank you very much. Let me just start out. There have been a lot of changes in the global topography of leadership. Over 4 billion people voted in elections this year, and one of those elections was in the United States, my country. And Donald Trump won that election. And Donald Trump has had a lot to say on China, and he's been very tough on China. But my sense is China's not freaking out about Donald Trump. But what is your view of how China sees the coming Trump years?
First of all, congratulations on Donald Trump's winning this presidential election. He actually deserved it. And now he not only has won the presidency, but the Republicans have now been in control of the House as well as the Senate. So it's a sweeping win for Mr. Trump as well as the Republican Party.
Does it seem a little bit, I mean, not to be too facetious, like one-party rule?
Well, it will never be one-party rule in the United States. In 4 years' time, or 8 years' time, or 12 years' time, there will be a change of leadership in the White House. And for the 2 houses, it may change in 2 years or 4 years. So I think a change is the rule of the game, rather than no change or always continuous in the same party control of the United States. Having said that, I think I do admire Donald Trump for demonstrating audacity and leadership and control of himself, as well as the environment, when an attempted assassination on his life was committed. He really impressed many people, including me, and it meant that Mr. Trump had a mission to do, and he wants to get his job done. So it depends on what exactly he wants to do. He wants to do a revolution inside the United States, and he also wants to promote this mega in the world. And I think whatever he will do or accomplish for the coming 4 years, the United States will not be the same as it is today.
Well, as I hear it, a lot of the MAGA or Make America Great Again rhetoric has a lot to do with bashing China, talking about tariffs against Chinese products, dealing with Chinese threats around the world. And there's a kind of China hysteria, if you will, in part of the political rhetoric of that. So I'm interested in how you're hearing that. Are you hearing it differently than I am?
First of all, tariff seems to be the preferred instrument for Mr. Trump, or for
everybody,
or for his incoming administration. However, I would say someone need to really tell Mr. Trump, the president-elect and soon to be the president, that the tariffs are paid by the American people, mostly the consumers. It's not paid by China or the Chinese government at all. So in a sense, the tariffs against China or against the Canadians or the Mexicans or any other country are a kind of tax against the American people. It is one of the reasons why it fueled inflation and eroded the quality of life of the American people. I'm sure Mr. Trump cares about a more balanced trade, but tariff is probably the worst instrument he can wield on imports. There must be other ways which can help the Americans achieve their strategic goal without, for example, inflating the tariffs, because the tariffs are paid by the American people.
Some smart people I know say that power is like the stock market. It's a function of future expectations. And if you look at China in the future, it looks like it's got a great future. It's growing, bigger footprint, greater economy, becoming eventually the largest economy in the world. And some people look at the United States as somewhat contracting strategically, more diminished ambitions, more negativity in managing what it has. And so they see a rising China and somewhat of a sinking America. How do you see it?
My view is that there is no competition between China and the United States.
Really?
Really. Why? Because China is ahead of the United States in many areas. The United States is ahead of China in many areas. The natural endowments for China and the United States are completely different. On the other hand, China will continue to grow. I remember in the 1990s when I was practicing investment banking with Morgan Stanley in New York and in Hong Kong, US was about 8 times as big as China in terms of the size of the economy. Now China is ahead of the United States if we use purchasing power parity, and if we use a nominal exchange rate, China is anywhere between 65 to 70% of the United States. However, if you listen to Elon Musk, who is very influential vis-a-vis President-elect Donald Trump, he keeps saying that by the middle of the century, the size of the Chinese economy will be doubling the size of the US economy. I think he may have some reason to say this, and I think China will continue to grow. Sooner or later, China will be larger as an economy compared with the United States using official exchange rate. When exactly that moment will be, I do not know. Maybe 2030, 2035, etc. However, I think this is not the real competition. If there is one competition between the United States and China, the real competition, I would say that will be, for example, if China wants to impose its ideology, its political system, its way of doing things onto the United States, or vice versa. The United States wants to change China into a completely different system. But I can assure you, China has no desire, no capability, no willingness, no resources to do that at all against any other country, especially against the United States.
Victor, let me ask you about national security and foreign policy interests of China. And, so when I look out there in the world, we're all sort of woke up one day and Chinese diplomacy was key to resolving a major tension here in the Middle East. We're talking here in Doha, and China ended up being the bridge between the Saudis and the Iranians in a normalization arrangement. Was really shocking. The United States was not involved. Is this an indication of a more robust and engaged Chinese foreign policy in real deep disputes?
Well, I would say China's effort to achieve a rapprochement between Saudis and the Iranians was a turning point in Chinese diplomacy. Why? Because for decades, China had very good relations with Saudi Arabia on the one hand and with Iran on the other hand. Many times, Saudis would tell China, well, given our special relationships, why don't you downgrade your relationship with Iran? China said no. China-Saudi relations are very important, but China-Iranian relations are also very important. And to Iran, it's the same thing. But sooner or later, China reached a point, and China said, why couldn't I bring my good relations with Saudi Arabia and my relations with Iran to the same table, bring the two great countries together and convince them that rapprochement is better? I think that's the turning point. And it's so fortunate that both the Saudi Arabians and the Iranians listened to this and achieved rapprochement. This will be a landmark event not only for the Middle East, but also for the Islamic faith of different affiliations. And I think China wants to do more of these major breakthroughs in diplomacy. You will see China being very actively engaged with other countries, try to solve the disputes between and among themselves.
Well, you know, one of the big raging conflicts in the world right now, of course, is Ukraine and Russia's invasion of Ukraine. I've paid careful attention to what China has said about it, concerns over sovereignty, but we're not wanting to intervene. Sometimes, to be honest, it's confusing to me to listen to Chinese diplomats describe which side of the line they're on. But clearly, another part of this is the relationship between China and Russia that has no bounds, that, you know, is pronounced to be very, very deep. But I guess my question to you is, you're so much larger than Russia economically. They may have a lot more nuclear weapons, but are there behaviors of Russia in this relationship with no bounds that give you concern?
Well, I think China is doing the right thing, urging Russia and Ukraine to stop the war from day one and keeps talking to them in that tone and urging all the other countries not to really pour more fuel onto the fire. Bring the war to an end as quickly as possible before it's too late.
You know, if you look at the Middle East, and again, here at the Doha Forum, a lot of conversations about a potentially completely reshaped Middle East in which a domino effect of October 7th and the Hamas attack against Israel and the response against Gaza, which had led to expansion into conflicts with Hezbollah in Lebanon, you know, with Iran. Now we see in Syria, and Russia, of course, is involved in Syria deeply, or Iran. Where is China in this map? What are your points of concern? Where are the tensions in relationships as you see it? Or are you just sitting on the sidelines?
From day one, again, China called on Israel and the Palestinians to cease fire because China fully respects the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people. China has been promoting this two-state solution for decades.
Do you think there's any chance of a real two-state solution?
No, I think we have to achieve that because that's the only way to rid the Middle East of this menace of perpetual fighting and perpetual war between the Israelis and the Arabs, for example.
So you and President Joe Biden are on the same page. Why do you think President Biden has failed so dramatically in achieving a two-state solution?
I think President Biden and his administration is not serious about really promoting the two-state solution because they are very much swayed into providing unlimited financial support and military support to Israel. Now, without the U.S. unconditional support, Israel cannot sustain its long-lasting war against the Palestinians. By now, more than 40,000 innocent Palestinian civilians have been killed. 75% of them are women and children, including many pregnant women. And this has been generally being labeled as atrocities, as a
Erhalte jetzt eine komplett kostenlose Trading-Ausbildung. Wenn du lernen möchtest, wie Trading profitabel und vor allem auch nachhaltig funktioniert, dann lade ich dich zu meiner
genocide, etc. And Israel is forfeiting all the goodwill it has accumulated ever since its independence. And I think Prime Minister Netanyahu is really turning himself into a person of great liability because he's not helping Israel in any constructive way. He's bringing Israel more and more into a corner. And also the spreading of war in the Middle East may eventually be very damaging to the fundamental interest, legitimate interests of the Israeli people anyway. So I think the United States should do the right thing. I'm always confused when the American government said we want to give unconditional support to Israel. I think they need to revise that. They need to say, if Israel is doing the right thing, we want to give them unconditional support. If Israel is doing the wrong thing, if Israel is committing atrocities or genocide, for example, why should the United States, the biggest and the most important, most consequential country in the world, give unconditional support to Israel? Further, Prime Minister Netanyahu is being opposed by up to more than 75% of the people in Israel. They want to boost him away from the office. They want to send him to prison, for example. So I think we are really talking about the situation where probably Prime Minister Netanyahu wants to further escalate to avoid being caught up in that legal quagmire that he personally is faced with.
Are you surprised, Victor? This may be too strong a term, but are you surprised from your perspective of also being a major stakeholder? You're now involved in this region more, China's more involved in this region, of the impotence of Arab states with regards to Palestinian situation. I've been surprised that there hasn't been stronger actions, activities across the board. No Arab state has ripped up its peace deal that had a peace deal with Israel. And there's still belief that perhaps down the road, there could even be a Saudi-Israeli normalization, despite what we've heard from Saudi leadership recently, that might ignore the Palestinian state issue and proceed in some normalization. I'm just interested in whether people think that Palestine and a just situation of Palestinians can be ignored to get to a different place there. And are you worried about that?
I'm not worried about that. If you listen very carefully to what the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has to say, they put it very clearly on the table. They would be happy to normalize relations with Israel on one condition. That is, before they do that, the two-state solution should be realized. I think that's the very good position for Saudi Arabia. After all, it is a spiritual leader in this part of the world, and it has a lot of responsibilities on its shoulder to recognize Israel before Israel agrees to a two-state solution. May be considered as a betrayal of the Palestinian people to start with, and also letting down many Muslims, many Arabs, for their real pursuit of the legitimate interest of the Palestinian people. Because fundamentally, Israelis and the Palestinians should be viewed equal with each other. If anyone says Israelis are more superior than the Palestinians and the Palestinians are inferior to the Israelis, and therefore they should not be given equal protection, that itself is an insult to Islam, is an insult to the Muslims. And I don't think the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in its proud self would ever tolerate a prospect like that.
Another area of major Chinese diplomatic investment and economic investment is this organization called the BRICS. BRICS was actually a kind of accidental collection, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. Now it's expanded to include other nations, including the UAE and some others. But I'm interested in whether you think the BRICS is serious, like if it's a serious challenge to the US-dominated economic order, the dollar, the SWIFT system, whether that's China's intention to undermine the reserve currency status of the dollar.
Well, first of all, BRICS is serious, and now they already have 10 member states, and the fact that a country like Turkey applied to join BRICS, and Turkey is a member of NATO, is really becoming a turning
Turkey
point.
loves to hedge its bets.
Yeah. It will be a turning point if Turkey officially joins BRICS as a full member.
Or
Now,
Saudi Arabia, perhaps.
Saudi Arabia is already a member.
1 foot in and
Yes.
don't go to the meetings.
Yes, but I don't think BRICS is anti-America or is disruptive. I personally am not a big fan of de-dollarization, but I really firmly oppose weaponizing the dollar or weaponizing the SWIFT system. Because if you want to weaponize the dollar or seize other countries' assets at will, for example, and exclude other banks from the SWIFT system, fundamentally and philosophically, you create such a level of despair or apprehension that you want to do something as an alternative. Therefore, when I listen to Mr. Donald Trump talking about slapping 100% tariff against any country which wants to come up with an alternative currency, for example, he was talking about BRICS members, I think President Trump, soon to be, will need to declare that no one should weaponize the dollar and no one should weaponize the SWIFT system. That will reduce the pressure on many countries which want to really have an alternative to the dollar because they worry about the weaponization of the dollar. They worry about the weaponization of the SWIFT system. So we need to really call a spade a spade. And if no one is going to weaponize the dollar, why should any other country really spend a lot of time to come up with an alternative to the dollar.
There is a standoff where many politicians want to preserve and protect Taiwan's autonomy and democracy. And that's a real point of tension for some people. And there's been a worry about what's unfolded in Hong Kong and the trying and sentencing of democracy protesters in Hong Kong. And then, of course, there are people who point to domestic issues inside China, the state of status of the Uyghurs. I'm sure you've discussed this many times. But that arena, that package is something that is generating more and more political interest and support in U.S. politics, and that affects national security. It's a very big issue with Marco Rubio, who's the likely next Secretary of State, very much for the next national security advisor. So I don't mean to go on it, but I'm just sort of interested in whether there is an understanding about the sensitivity of those issues at the highest levels of the Chinese government.
Well, first of all, I want to tell your global audience that I firmly believe, and many people in China in high positions also believe, like I do, that without democracy, you cannot have modernization. However, democracy does not have one single form which suits all the countries. Every country needs to come up with its own adaptation to democracy and democracy to its own national circumstances. Now, the second thing is autonomy of Taiwan, in my best judgment, need to be preserved for the benefits of the people in Taiwan as well as for China as a whole. Now, eventually, peaceful reunification, which will be much better than any other form, and one country, two system, or even one country, three system, for example, can be figured out. And the Americans worry about the supply chain of the semiconductors. I think China can be flexible enough to declare the whole island of Taiwan as the biggest free trade zone in China, and there will be guaranteed in and out for the semiconductor chips of all kinds. So I think we need to focus on really what's the most important matter, that is the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of China, and the fact that there is only one China and Taiwan being part of China. On that basis, a lot of flexibilities and adaptations can be worked out to satisfy the legitimate interests of many countries, especially the United States, because the United States care about free flow of chips in and out of Taiwan, which, in my view, may be a very legitimate consideration.
If President Trump, who likes to be a president who engaged in a lot of firsts, goes to Taiwan, will China be able to live with that?
No, I think if that happens, the diplomatic relations between China and the United States will be broken first, because China will never allow any country in the world, including the United States of America, to have relations with both China on the one hand and Taiwan on the other hand. If you want to bet on Taiwan, and the United States has bet on Taiwan or the nationalist government several times in history, then you need to walk away from China. That's the quid pro quo situation. I don't think any real leader of the United States want to forfeit U.S. relations with China, which has a population of more than 1.4 billion people, for the sake of encouraging separatism of Taiwan. It's not worth it, and it's not going to work.
Well, we'll have to leave it there. Victor Gao, Vice President of the Center on China and Globalization, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
So what's the bottom line? China believes that America is encircling it strategically, trying to curtail China's military and economic growth. It sees an America that's desperately trying to hold on to its crumbling global status while China's global footprint grows. But there are no guarantees about the future. For China, with its growing power, it could easily overstep and suffer, especially if the world's smaller countries see it more as a predator than a friend. And theoretically, at least, America could improve its global standing by decreasing its hypocrisy and working with some of these nations that are in real need. But for now, both sides are watching each other with a lot of distrust. It's a potentially toxic brew that will impact the world over the coming years. And that's
talk about America's Lord and Savior, Donald Jehoshaphat Trump. They're not booing, they're saying Bruce for no apparent reason.
Hi, welcome back to Joe Blogs. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about what's happening in the economy in the United States and potential impact that this is now going to have on the global economy. If you've been following the channel, you'll know that in the run-up to taking over as the president, Donald Trump said that he was going to oppose additional tariffs against all imports from Canada, Mexico and China as a result of the fentanyl problem that's going on in the USA right now. He said that that fentanyl was being produced in China and that Mexico and Canada were allowing it to pass over the border into the USA. So let's hear from the White House spokesman as to what the situation is with regards to those tariffs.
I was just with the president in the Oval Office, and I can confirm that tomorrow, the February 1st deadline that President Trump put into place at a statement several weeks ago continues. The president will be implementing tomorrow a 25% tariffs on Mexico, 25% tariffs on Canada, and a 10% tariff on China for the illegal fentanyl that they have sourced and allowed to distribute into our country, which has killed tens of millions of Americans. These are promises made and promises kept by the president.
So as you've just seen, Donald Trump has now followed through with his threat to apply these additional tariffs. But why is the USA doing this? And what impact is it going to have on both the US economy and also the economies of China, Canada and Mexico? Well, in order to understand the rationale for applying these tariffs, let's have a look at the trade deficit that the USA is running. This chart shows the difference between the value of all of the USA's exports and the cost of all of its imports dating back to November 2022. So basically what we're looking at here is the trade deficit that the USA is running up, which is basically how much money the US economy is paying out to other economies to buy in all of their goods and services. And the scale on the left-hand side of this chart is shown in billions of US dollars and goes from 0 at the bottom to 90 billion at the top. And you can see that the section at the bottom between 0 and $60 billion has actually been concertinaed because the USA has been running a deficit of more than 60 billion over the last 2 years. And we've got two different lines on this chart. The blue line is showing the actual deficit that's been recorded every single month, and the orange line is showing the 3-month moving average, so basically smoothing out the sharp movements. And what you can see here are two clear trends. Between November 22 and 23, there was actually a downward trend in the deficit. It was reducing. However, between November 23 and November 24, you can see that there's been a sharp increase. The USA is now importing a lot more products than it's exporting. And the amount of the deficit for the most recently published figures for November 24 was $78.2 billion, which represented an increase of $4.6 billion against the figure for October. And this trade deficit is a point that Donald Trump has made repeatedly in his run-up to taking over as the president. He sees this as a big problem. What he wants to do is impose tariffs to make imports more expensive and therefore American businesses more of a level playing field in terms of being able to sell their products in both the USA and also overseas. And this data, published by the US Census Bureau and the US Bureau of Economic Analysis, shows the breakdown of the US trade deficit by country. And what you can see here is that the largest trade deficit in November was with China at $25.4 billion. The second largest was with the European Union at 20.5 billion. The third largest was Mexico at 15.4, followed by Vietnam at 11.3, Ireland at 9.3, Germany 6.9, Taiwan 5.5, Japan 5.3, South Korea 5.1, and the 10th largest deficit for the USA in November was Canada at 4.9 billion. So the trade tariffs that have been announced against China, Mexico and Canada represent the USA's first, third and 10th largest trade deficits, and the combined total in November was $45.7 billion. So you can see really what the driver is from President Trump's perspective in terms of applying these additional tariffs. He's obviously named the drug problem as being the reason, But fundamentally, what he wants to do is reduce the amount of imports that are coming from those countries in order to give either American businesses more of a chance to compete or the USA to actually earn more revenue from taxing all of those imports. As we've just seen, the USA's second largest trade deficit in November was with the European Union. It represented $20.5 billion. So you may be thinking, why hasn't Donald Trump imposed any additional tariffs against the EU? Well, let's hear what he had to say on the matter.
Am I going to impose tariffs on the European Union? Do you want the truthful answer, or should I give you a political answer? Absolutely. Absolutely. The European Union has treated us so terribly. We've been taken advantage of because others have charged us VATs. As an example, the European Union charges us 20% plus a VAT tax, called the VAT tax, very similar. And it costs us an absolute fortune. We are treated so badly. They don't take our cars. They don't take our farm products, essentially. They don't take almost anything. And we have a tremendous deficit with the European Union. So we'll be doing something very substantial with the European Union. We're going to bring the level up to where it should be.
So I think it's fair to say that there will be additional tariffs coming for the European Union. And this represents a major problem because there are 27 different countries within the EU, and all those countries will be affected. All of the companies that are exporting to the USA will see their revenue falling because if you apply additional tariffs of 20 or 25% against all of those products, it will increase the price in the USA, and therefore US consumers are likely to buy less of those products and therefore reduce the revenue for those companies and those economies. So the big question here is, what is going to be the impact of these additional tariffs? Well, firstly, if we look at the percentage of exports that are going from all of those different regions to the USA, the worst affected is going to be Mexico, because around 80% of all of Mexico's exports go directly to the USA. And if all of those exports are now going to cost 25% more because an additional tariff has been applied against all Mexican products, that's going to reduce the demand for those products, and therefore those Mexican companies are going to see a fall in sales and a fall in revenue. And the same will apply to Canada, because around 75% of all of Canada's exports also goes to the USA. But I think the big difference with regards to Canada versus Mexico is what Canada is actually exporting to the USA. Mexico is exporting a lot of manufactured products. They've got cheap manufacturing in Mexico, they've got cheap labor, and therefore they can produce things at a lower cost than the USA, and so it's advantageous for the US to import all of those products. However, Canada is exporting a lot of energy products. It's exporting oil and gas and other forms of energy. And the problem from the USA's point of view is that it won't be as easy to be able to just stop buying all of those sort of products, because energy is in demand. The reason why the USA is importing energy products is because it's not producing enough of the right sort of products to serve its own market. It's producing lots of oil. It's the biggest producer in the world, but it's exporting some of that oil, and it has to import various products to offset all of the demand. And so the problem from the US consumer's point of view is that if all of those Canadian energy products suddenly increase in price by 25%, it won't be as easy to just buy alternatives, because there isn't enough being produced in the USA. And so the US either will have to import from other countries, or consumers will just have to pay an increased price. Now, in terms of the impact of the European Union of the future tariffs, the EU exports around 20% of all of its exports directly to the USA. So again, if they increase in price and therefore the demand falls, we will see European companies suffering as a result of that. And in terms of the impact on China, around 11% of all of China's exports go directly to the US. So you might be thinking, well, 11% doesn't seem too bad. Maybe China won't be that affected. But you need to take into account the sheer volume that we're talking about. China is exporting a huge amount of products all around the world, and it has these mega factories to produce all of these products, and it needs to find markets to be able to sell them into. And 11% of China's total exports represents a huge volume of products and also a huge amount of revenue. And if all of those products are now going to be more expensive, this 10% tariff that's been applied against China, then that will probably mean a reduction in demand for those products, and therefore there will be a reduction in orders. And so those Chinese companies will be suffering because they are producing the maximum amount of output. And so if you haven't got markets to go to, what do you do with that product? You can't just reduce the price and expect everybody to buy more. Now, potentially, the impact of the tariff of the 10% increase in price in the USA could be offset by Chinese companies reducing the sales price by 10%. So net, the sales price in the USA remains the same. The benefit of that to the USA would be that they're getting the 10% tariff. They're getting that tax and taking it into their revenue. The Chinese companies would be losing out because they'd have to cut their sales price. And if you follow my channel, you'll know that I've talked a lot about the fact that producer prices, factory gate prices in China have been falling for the last 2.5 years. And if this results in a further fall in those factory gate prices, that could really hurt some of those Chinese companies and ultimately the Chinese economy. So overall here, what we're talking about is that the exports from all of these different countries represent a meaningful percentage to the USA. And this means that a lot of companies in Canada, Mexico, China, and the European Union are going to suffer as a result of these additional import taxes. So we've talked about the impact on the overseas economies, but what's the likely impact on the US economy? Well, firstly, if we just look at the tariffs themselves, any product that's coming from Canada, China, or Mexico will now cost more because they're going to have additional taxes added onto the sales price. So if you're going to buy one of those products and you go to the store, you'll suddenly find that it's 10% or 25% more expensive. So you may be able to find a cheaper alternative, but if you can't, then you're just going to have to pay more for that. And that means that prices will go up, and therefore there's a likely expectation that inflation will go up. And this is one of the issues that the American economy has been trying to address over the last 2 years. It's been trying to get inflation back down to its target level of around 2%. So inflation, if it starts going up again, is going to cause a problem for the Fed, and that means that they may consider increasing interest rates. And what we've been seeing over the last 12 months or so is that rates have been on their way down. The markets are expecting rates to continue coming down in 2025. However, if these tariffs result in rising inflation, we could see interest rates rising again, and that could cause problems for the US economy. But the other issue here is what happens with regards to the response from all of those countries, because they're not going to sit back and allow the USA to apply additional tariffs to all of their imports without taking some retaliatory action. And all of these countries have come out and said that if the USA does do this, then they will potentially also apply tariffs against anything that's being imported into their economy from the USA. Now, obviously, the size is a lot smaller because we saw the deficits earlier. The USA is buying a lot more from those economies than it's selling into. But if you're a US business that is exporting to Mexico or Canada or China or the European Union, you're now running the risk of your product being hit with additional tariffs. That will increase the price of your product in those markets and most likely will result in a fall in sales and a fall in revenue. So there is a potential here that the US export markets could be impacted. The companies that are exporting lots of different things will see a reduction in their revenue and their profitability, and that could potentially hurt the US economy. Now, obviously, the trade-off that Donald Trump is looking for is that he wants those US businesses to start selling more in the US itself, because the cost of all of the imports is going up, and therefore US consumers may consider buying American rather than buying imports.
One of the great challenges in this world is knowing enough about a subject to think you're right.
So what's the summary and conclusion today? Well, I wanted to post this video because I think what's happening with Donald Trump and his tariffs is really important right now, not just for the US economy, but also for the global economy. As we've talked about, the reason why the US is imposing these additional tariffs is fundamentally they have a huge deficit. They're paying out more every single month to all of the other economies than they're receiving in terms of sales revenue. But realistically, that is going to be the way things operate because the US is the biggest economy in the world and it's a net purchaser. It wants to buy things. People are consumers and the US doesn't produce everything that everybody wants to buy. And so therefore, it's importing certain products and it's importing from the other big economies around the world. And as we've seen in today's data, some of those economies are highly dependent on those exports, particularly Mexico
and Canada and China. Now, China's percentage was a lot smaller than Canada and Mexico's. However, the sheer volume of products that it's exporting every single day to the USA is absolutely enormous, and so is the revenue. And so what we're seeing here is Donald Trump is trying to take control of the situation. He's increasing the price of all of those products to make it a level playing field for all of the US businesses. And also, he wants to pull in more revenue for his economy by taking more tax off all of those sales. But the problem that we've got here is that it's likely that all of those other economies are going to retaliate. They are likely to apply taxes against US imports. And so what we're seeing here is a trade war developing all across the world. And fundamentally, this is going to be bad news for business because it will be more expensive to export things to the USA and all of these other countries. And so it will be bad news for consumers because we will have to pay a higher price for these goods. One of the reasons why US businesses haven't been able to compete is that they couldn't produce things for the right price, and consumers are very price conscious. You will buy something, generally speaking, if it's cheaper, if its quality is as good, because you don't want to waste money. So people will be forced to pay more for all of the goods that they're buying in the USA. And as we discussed earlier in the video, that potentially could push up inflation and result in the Fed changing its policy and having to increase interest rates again, which increases the cost of borrowing for companies and consumers, and potentially therefore reduces the amount of investment and can cause your economy to slow down. So we've got a really fine balance here in terms of increasing the tariffs to increase your revenue and reduce the level of imports. But at the same time, it could force the economy in the USA into a situation whereby inflation rises and interest rates start going up again, and therefore changes the dynamic in terms of the way consumers and companies think about taking on more debt. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens, what retaliation comes from all of those other countries, what import duties are applied against the European Union and what they decide to do, and ultimately what happens with inflation during the course of the rest of 2025. So hopefully you've enjoyed today's video, you found it useful, informative and thought-provoking. If you've liked what I've said, then please give me a thumbs up. Thank you for watching this video all the way through to the end, and here's something to put a smile on your face.
So guys, thanks for following this edition of the podcast. We'll have another episode next weekend, hopefully Saturday or Sunday. So our regular podcast will be Saturday or Sundays. So we thank you for following. We appreciate your consent. YouTube, we have 2 followers on YouTube. Please subscribe, please like, please comment. Thank you for following my YouTube subscriber. I don't know where I can really tap. Okay, let me see if I can get on YouTube to talk to the subscribers there. Thank you for following on YouTube. We appreciate your support. Please subscribe to the channel. Please like, please comment. So our YouTube subscribers, our YouTube followers, we want you guys. We appreciate you for following our Facebook as well as TikTok. Thank you for following. We ask you on the YouTube channel to please subscribe to our channel and follow. So we end this video here and look forward to seeing you next week. Look forward to seeing you next week. So bye guys. Bye guys. See you next week, Saturday or Sunday. We end this live stream here.